pleasure always to be in Mary Immaculate. We've been a good number of times in the past 12 months for different reasons, mostly to do with international activity. I was looking up some figures in the last couple of days about our participation in international work. 40 years ago, there were about 1,000 students from overseas coming to Ireland. Today, there's 35,000. But interestingly, in 1975 or thereabout, the number one source of students in Europe was Britain, still is. Number one source in Africa was Nigeria, still is. United States, obviously in North America, Australia and that part of the world. Latin America didn't feature at all. And in Asia, it was Malaysia 40 years ago. Now it's China. And what has changed from an Irish point of view over the last 30 years in particular, and we were celebrating it recently and celebrated it in UL last week in a tri-college event with LIT and Mary Immaculate, has been the Erasmus programme. It wasn't part of the European Treaty, which was set up the economic community back in 1957, the Treaty of Rome. It came in much more recently, particularly in the post-Maastricht period and more significantly since the adoption of the single labour market, where students, staff and others can move freely about Europe for the purposes of employment and education. And we've used that fund to further the agenda, because it was Erasmus that has set up first international offices in the various participating institutions. Before that, there was no structured response. As I said, students have been coming to here for as long as there are higher education colleges, but they were coming for programs that were delivered with a domestic audience in mind. And that's beginning now to change, particularly given the advent of mobility, credit mobility, where people come for a year or a semester, or as in the new initiative which will start here after Christmas with students from America coming for repeated 5-week periods. And that is becoming much more a feature of educational life. But important as, which one do I use to advance? I beg your pardon? This one here. Okay, hit it again. I need to escape.
I think you just tap the mouse and
Oh.
the screen.
One of the, that's grand, perfect. And one of the changes, well, one of the key aspects, but often overlooked aspects of Erasmus, is that it funds staff mobility and staff training and collaborations between staff across the various member states. The thing you must probably, the distinction you find worthwhile making is that Europe and the rest of the world. Europe and in its 28 countries, soon to be 27, and a few other countries outside that, they're classified or called program countries. So there is an action called 103, and that, that promotes mobility of staff to and from institutions in Europe. And there's a set number of conditions relating to that type of activity. So for example, if you want to do a mobility to a European partner, now is your time to make application, because on the 1st of February of next year, we will receive the applications from the Irish participating colleges. What you can do in terms of a teaching or training mobility, you can move for a minimum, thank you very much, Emer, of 2 days to 2 months. And in that period, you must do a minimum of 8 hours teaching, if it's a teaching exchange you want to do. If you're doing a training exercise, it's slightly different. It isn't measured by hours. And a training exercise could include a librarian going to see another librarian about some new particular methodology in delivering that service. It can be looking at how you handle access, how you deal with migrants, or it can be you going into a classroom and teaching in the subject that you are an expert in. And the basic conditions of that are, as I said, 2 days to 2 months, and a fund of money is given to you to cover the cost of that. Not fully, I would say it's co-funded by the institution, but it's one figure based on the numbers of days that you're abroad. And it's about 80 to 100 euro per day. And that's the type of support you will get for something that's European based. Equally, you can invite in colleagues from your partners in Europe, and they are funded by their respective national agencies of the sending country. What has come about more recently, and where Limerick, where Mary I has been particularly active, and active in each of the 3 years from 15, 16 and 17, is mobility to and from other parts of the world. And the European Commission has sourced funding from development budgets within the European Commission area. And that money then is divided into about 13 or 14 lots. So for example, Africa is broken into 4 regions. It includes this part over here from the Mediterranean. It's called European Neighbourhood Instrument South. So it covers those countries in Africa that border or touch on the Mediterranean. South Africa itself is a region. West Africa next year will be a region on its own, and that's 12 countries around where places like Nigeria, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, and so on. And then the rest of sub-Saharan Africa completes the picture. Asia is split into 2 between Asia and what's called industrialized Asia. Industrialized Asia includes places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. North America is Canada and the US. Latin America covers everywhere from Mexico down, and there's parts of Europe in the Balkans and in Eastern Europe beyond Poland, in places like Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine, and so on. What you can do there, and you have been like Tony Langlois, has been to Morocco, for example, and he has been there, they have been to you, and educational exchanges in the teaching of his particular subject, and media and musicology and so on, and he's been able to use this funding to drive that and promote mobility. Unlike the European Erasmus program, which is heavily student orientated, this one can be anyway. It can be into you, it can be out of you, it can be exclusively staff, it can be exclusively student. So you can determine what it is you want. So more of our activists in that area belong to the staff community. So all of that orange-coloured part of the world is now in the Erasmus program. The money is competitive in most regions, bar a couple like Eastern Europe and Western Balkans and probably Central Asia. Not as many of our students and staff want to go to those parts of the world, but we have people going. And Ireland has now relationships in parts of the world where historically we never had. We have a tradition in some parts of the world, and clearly the Anglophone world is in our kind of culture and educational space. So we would have huge demand for America and Canada and Australia, main countries of Asia, Brazil as well, or Latin America in general, but we don't have enough money for all of those. We have more money than in some parts of the world. So if you were thinking, where's the least competitive parts? It's Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, Central Asia, and Western Balkans. So I know, again, I see people who have been to the University of Novi Sad in Serbia. So there's a very good chance you will, if you have a particular project that you want to develop with a partner out there, and if you maybe even want to develop student mobility, you can do this kind of, use this fund to get there. And if your project meets a minimum level, a minimum threshold of quality, there's a very good chance you'll be successful. In other parts of the world, you're competing for a much more limited base of funding, and the task of getting funds is a bit more challenging. So is there any particular question, like on this part of the information, that might resonate with you, or that you might like? Elaine?
So for the staff mobility to a partner country, and you mentioned students, could, for example, staff and a postgrad student be under the same project?
Yes, you could. In terms of the student, there's no barrier to student flows in staff. So you can go in any part of the world, you can send a staff member, you can admit or have a staff member come to you from any part of the world. In terms of the outward student, and you can have students coming to you from any part of the world. There are some limitations in who you can send out as a student. In places that have, like Africa, it has to be a PhD student, because it's not quite the same kind of mobility. There is a capacity building dimension in that budget, and it is felt that a PhD student can add more to the capacity, or improve the enhanced capacity of the receiving country. Where other parts of the world, maybe in South America or in the Balkans and so on, then students at any level can go out. But you could build a project that would take half dozen or 10, it depends what you want, students with you on a teaching exchange, bring them, you as a teacher going in, and they would be maybe sitting in class as well, undertaking learning in another university, with you contributing and maybe receiving teaching from that. And it's probably, the difficulty of course is that the student mobility part of it has to be 3 months, and that is a challenge. But in theory it is doable. For you to go to the partner country, it's a minimum of 5 days. And the money is much better. If you want to go to any one of those parts of the world, your airfare is paid and you receive €180 per day. So it's a much better funded scheme. If you're sending a student to any parts of those worlds, it's 700, I think now, students per month and their airfare. If the students are going around Europe, they get about 250 to 350 euro depending on where they're going. And that's one allocation per month. There isn't a distinction drawn between airfare and your living expenses. If you're receiving a student from any, and I know you have endeavoured to take in students from the Syrian region through Lebanon for various different humanitarian reasons, they will get now in the coming year, I think it was 850, I think it's gone up to €900 now, and their airfare. So €900 is a decent scholarship, I think, to come to Limerick, where the cost of living would be less than Dublin. But even in Dublin, it's not bad. There aren't too many other schemes funding at that level. But so that's the funding aspect of it. And for every student or staff that you manage, unlike the intra-European one, you manage the inward mobility as well here. In the intra-European, you don't manage the inward. They're sent by another university, funded by the national agency in their country of origin, and they arrive here. Of course, you deal with them when they're here, and you have to manage them there. But you manage the funding flow in both directions under this project. And for every person that is supported by you, the college here gets €350. So if you send out, if you're involved with 10 different people, you get 3,500. And that's money you can keep, invest in the management of the program. You're supposed to share it with the colleges. If the college in the sending country does some of the work, then you agree a certain proportion of that money might go to them for their administrative costs. So that's basically the nub of that particular activity. And it is about professionalising the staff. It is about allowing them to go to parts of the world where they may have a research interest. I know of people who have, in archaeology, gone to Serbia and are looking at various different historic ruins and the origin of Christianity and so on, and how much impact and evidence there is. And they have even traced some similar, they have actually traced connections between there and even a part of South Limerick in terms of what artefacts have been found. So that's the kind of thing. We have had students going, as I said, Tony went to Morocco, we've had others going to places. I met 2 Ethiopian students at UL last week who were in the World Music Academy, and they're students of music in Ethiopia, and they're doing music here as well, including Irish traditional music, and they were more than able to mix it in terms of performance and that. Others, are a huge amount of are working in domain-specific areas, going to the countries where there's particular expertise or access to a very well-resourced library in a particular discipline, or teaching colleagues that they would like to work with and share some time. They can also be going to work on building other connections, like a student mobility pattern between here and any other part of the world, or a teaching flow. The one thing, like normally in these areas of the world, if you take a student in, you're charging them the full academic fee. In this thing, Erasmus, you cannot charge them fees. But what it does do for you is it positions you in places of the world where you have not got a visible presence. And those often it's the case that if an engagement takes place at an undergraduate level, the student comes back and pays you for a master's program or a PhD program or something like that. But you're building an offer into the education and the teaching and learning experience of those students that come here, that tells them that you're outward bound, there's internationalization at home, the mindset is global, and that there are these opportunities available to them now. We would very much like to see the conditions opened up and loosened a bit, because I would argue that a PhD student is not an undergraduate student, and mobility periods of a shorter duration might fit well in a master's program. And it equally strikes me as odd that we have students who go from bachelor's to master's to PhD, and then they might look for a job, but they've never studied abroad or done any kind of exploration or research or expose themselves to anything. And there's no discipline that we're teaching that doesn't have international applicability, or given that just even for simple practical reasons about the population nature of Ireland now is so much different than it once was. And there are multiple identities about being Irish, and whether it's sexual orientation, religious belief or none, language or other historic backgrounds and experiences. And Ireland is a much different space than it was. And education is changing very much that, because there's probably 10 to 12,000 students coming to Ireland now. There are 7,000 students coming to Ireland from Erasmus. About 2,000 of those are working in places of employment on the traineeship option. But there's 5,000 of them in colleges, and there's 3,000 of ours going out to other colleges as well. So about 8,000 and growing, and will soon be nearer to 10,000 students are having an engagement with partner institutions either here or in another European country. And part of your students are being educated elsewhere. And you've given that trust to another partner institution to be responsible for that delivery. And there's mapping and course credits and recognition, and they sit exams and do that. And they come back with other advantages as well. So it's a very much changed environment nowadays, and one that will grow. But it's not just about, in the past, there is a thinking in our system, and it's hard to blame the institutions for thinking this way, that internationalization is about foreign fee-paying students and about sending students on physical mobility abroad. The foreign fee-paying students, to me, is not internationalization, it's international fundraising. And I know why we have to do that, but we need to resolve the question of the funding of higher education anyway in Ireland, and it shouldn't be dependent, I think, on different systems and different people and situations beyond our control. Like we were doing very well in Brazil. We had 3,000 students, 1,000 a year for 3 years. That program stopped. Lots of institutions were thinking that's going to continue and making projections into the future about purchasing property and so on the basis that we'll have this income stream. It stopped because the economy fell in that country and political situation changed. I know that's where you're also interested in, and there's a new program coming down the tracks. That program started in 2013 in Ireland, and it was very much exclusively in the STEM area. But through Holly, approach was made, and we came back to the college here and started talking and see where there might be possibilities for Mary Immaculate to contribute. And we found areas within the kind of science teaching and education that goes on. And that has grown into getting Government of Ireland scholars, and Mariana is one of those, which has all happened here in this space in post HC, post Holly Common, and Ben, and the colleagues in the Erasmus office as well. But now the programme is moving to a different area, and Brazil has said clearly, and they were in Dublin on Monday, and by a great quirk of fate, the person who's in charge of international relations at the Brazil agency is from Ireland. And she says Brazil is no longer going to pay for services. They're not going to be handing over money for English language courses in Ireland and courses and different things and so on. They want to work with institutions in advanced countries, and Ireland is one of 20 or so. And we weren't in the Brazilian space until Science Without Borders happened. And now you are in that education area in Brazil. And next May, you will have 30 teachers who have been awarded excellence awards or received excellence awards in Brazil for their teaching, and this is their prize to come to Ireland, and they'll spend 2 weeks in Ireland, mostly in Limerick. And they particularly requested that it would be in Limerick that they would host that they will be hosted. But that gives you an opportunity to demonstrate the excellence and the niche expertise that this has for over 100 years in terms of primary school teaching and preschool and early childhood and so on. Because education in the Brazilian context is not as well developed in Ireland, and the public sector in first and second level is the poorer relation of the private sector. It's the opposite way around in higher education, where the publicly funded sector is better than the privately funded. But the irony of Ireland is that the poorer people go to the private institutions and the better off go to the publicly funded, because they can compete better at second level and pay for private second level tuition. So that's a reality in Brazil, but nevertheless they are very keen to change that environment, and they're enormously rich in terms of natural wealth. They haven't managed it the best way, but they're expecting change, and there may be a shift. One of the things that one should observe about Brazil is that it's a country that had a military dictatorship only 30 or 40 years ago, but even in the midst of their current problems, and there's a lot of corruption, democracy has largely held together, and stability has there. So there haven't been the kind of uprisings that would have taken place maybe 40 years ago, and education is playing that part. And I think if Ireland has a role there, it is to underpin that those respect for what we might call European values, although European values in many parts of the world were anything but noble. But now you get this opportunity to develop, I think, an expert relationship with Brazil in terms of upskilling their teaching. So it's not just about taking students. Professionals need that continual education as well, and where Ireland has an expertise, they want to share in that expertise. They want an ongoing partnership with you. So in Brazil, by the end of April, they expect to have about 40 universities selected for targeted funding. And they may well include some of the ones that you're already partnering with. And I know you've been in both the public sector and in the private with the pontificals, many of which are of outstanding quality as well. And so excellence is what they're driving. Next Monday in Dublin, we're having an international conference with the QQI. And again, it is about that changing environment in Ireland. We've come out of a very difficult period, still owe an awful lot of money, and money isn't being fed back into the system in a manner or at a scale that would be really needed. But it is changing. There have been investments, and in the last year, 1.1 million of money has been made available, and you have applied for it. You've been beneficiaries for the scholarship program, which has now 60 scholarships. The next call could be out any week, but it'll be early in the new year anyway. There'll still be 60 scholarships at €10,000 for foreign students outside Europe. But the difference will be that, subject to getting the agreement of the department, and I don't think it'll be a problem, there will be a national system for selecting students. The students will get an offer from Mary I and then go look for the scholarship elsewhere. And this is felt that it's necessary because it would, instead of you getting 2 or 3 scholarships from us and trying to make the best out of them, you can say there are 60 scholarships, we'll give you an offer of a place, and then you go look for the scholarship. And you might get more out of that because maybe there'll be more who will apply to Mary Immaculate. On the 10th of November, I think we closed the application on a mobility scheme for staff as well. And that had 1.7 million's worth of applications for 500,000, 124 individual projects. And we're very close to finalising that. And you're one of the application bodies or one of the colleges that applied. I can't reveal where you are, but the decision will be out before Christmas. And you're in there among the what we're trying to do at the moment is actually draw the last euro out of the system to make it as widespread as possible. It's a mobility fund. Basically, it's very like the 107. Travel and subsistence, travel and a contribution. But what is different about it and the European funding is it's not about a personal development program. It is about you, and maybe more than you, a team of colleagues coming from the institutions around the country, going to a country where you want to develop a partnership, be it research, be it teaching, be it anything that you feel that can usefully add to what it is you are aiming to achieve. We will have another call. I'm pretty confident that the department will come up with another 500, maybe more, given the huge unmet demand that we will have this time, that they will give us more money maybe next year, but I'm reasonably optimistic that we'll have at least another 500,000. So when you add that 500,000 to the 1.5 million that we have for this part of the world in 2018, we have 2 million for that, and there's 12 million for the other. The European Union is putting significant resources into Irish education, and that's making a very positive difference. I think in the period from we're in the 7-year period up to 2020, we're from 2016, I think this is, or 2014 to 2020, we get about 100 million euro into the Irish education system on different things, capacity building projects and student mobility, staff mobility, and so on. So it's a significant opportunity for you to attune whatever your needs, teaching, learning, research, or whatever, and it can be done. So, not maybe as easily as I make it out, but it can be done. And in certain parts of the world, it's more easier done than it is in the higher demand areas. But you know, you have again huge quality offering, and that I think is the real bonus and gain from international education. I think is there are, just say quickly, very few things. Joint masters programs. These are very well funded projects with high scholarship content from the European Union. So it's basically you and 2 other universities in Europe combining to teach a program. And up to now, the problem has been that not many new programs have been supported. They were supporting programs that had been in the previous round. This year, they expect mostly new programs. So the European Commission will award about 40 to 45 new joint masters. And students on those programs get scholarships to attend. Most of them do, European and outside of Europe. And other students can just pay normal fee, whatever you charge for that, and attend it. And you get about 50 or 60,000 to manage the course. And it runs, you get it for 4 years, so you get a preparation year and then 3 years of intake. And they're prestigious, they're highly in demand. The students have to study in 2 locations. So if there are 3 countries, you have to study. And they can be outside of Europe as well, the universities. They have to go to a minimum of 2. Capacity building is about us helping other parts of the world to improve their systems of education. And again, the whole world is in it, and you, particularly not the United States or Australia, but countries that are in need of capacity building improvement. And you can address your particular expertise at a single institution in a partner country, or you can be looking at something that's systemic, relating to the system maybe of admissions or access policy or preschool education, or you could be looking at maybe an individual institution, and there's various levels of funding available for that, quite significant. There are things like knowledge alliances where you work with the world of industry, and there have been about 2 or 3 DCU, an enterprise board in Louth and Waterford, I think, yes, Waterford IT, they get about €1 million. DIT actually is another. For developments in ICT or in entrepreneurship. Again, you could combine there with other partners and national and international to address some particular maybe educational need. And the last area then, all of this, 1, 2, 3, they're done, the decision is done in Brussels. So we promote, Brussels decide. International credit, mobility and intra-European, we decide, as in the HEA, through an evaluation system with people both in and outside of the HEA. And the final thing there is Jean Monnet. It's about promoting the ideals of the whole European project. So maybe you might want to bring in a teaching module into your education program about how that overlaps with the broader integration objectives of the European Union. And there are various other things like networks, which obviously would be building a network with maybe similar colleges in teacher education, or it can be a professorship where you might be looking at a particular type of area of exploration. Again, Europe is where you buy that money or get that money from. But they all have deadlines. Holly, Maeve and Patricia will have them from us basically mostly in February of next year. 1 or 2 of them go into March. And our own deadlines for next year's scholarship program and mobility program haven't been announced yet, but you get very ample notice about them. I don't know if I have any other. I think that's the last one, is it then? So there's money, there's expertise, there are networks. There are 5,000 universities and other institutions of higher education in Europe which are eligible to partner with you, and many more outside of that. But if you want to look at the detail, I think I won't try and communicate all that. I couldn't possibly get the message across to you. But I think the slides have been prepared by the Commission, so we use them because they are the most recent and the most up-to-date position in them. There are not many different national features. The model is pretty much the same everywhere. So basically, it's money. It's collaborative, it's engagement with partners, it's about developing individuals' expertise. It is not confined to academics, it is open to all staff in an institution, and it is global, albeit the non-European part has some different conditions in it that you won't find in the intra-European. The channel of communication from us to you is through Holly, Ben and the colleagues in the international part, in the Erasmus office, and we expect them to disseminate internally the message. In the coming year, we probably will revisit Limerick for something. We're looking at the possibility of holding regional fairs where we will maybe make a much greater connection with Irish policy in terms of skills, in terms of job strategies. Monday saw the introduction of a language policy, those kind of things, and bit by bit we're doing much more of that. One thing we were only this week talking with the IDA about having a traineeship partnership with IDA, who they would source companies in Ireland, partner companies in the European mainland, to allow Irish students to go to the headquarters of Lidl or Siemens or somewhere, and German students to come to their Irish base. That's something we're looking at. Again, we have a long ways to go to build it, but wherever you might feel, it mightn't be the B.Ed students, but it might be the B.A. students, or whatever, master students in working in R&D or in training or whatever. And there are educational providers, I suppose, in the private sector, in publishing and in so many other parts as well, in terms of various different tools that are used to enhance teaching and learning. So we have those particular websites. The one we have at ourselves is called Your Ireland, eurireland.ie, and we use that one to promote things that we have. I know that you have quite a list of staff that have been to many different parts, so covering China and Eastern Europe and the Middle East and so on. We have been it's been useful to bring down people from time to time to here and to other institutions in Limerick, to let them see the inside of our institutions. And at the end of the day, it's about establishing a personal working relationship and having trust in your partners that they can deliver what you expect and what you would expect your students to be exposed to. I hope if I have any questions, I'll try again to address them. If there's any more, again, the Brazil thing, timelines. Next year and is April. We'll be putting out the detail a bit more when we've clarified a few things. There's a possibility of a research event in Brazil in April of next year. We have to try and find if there's a demand from Irish people to go there, and then if we can find the resources, the money to put it into place. That's is a possibility around March of next year. Other things, I think I've given, I don't know, there is nothing else new. I think all the policy statements have been issued in the area. It's about time to implement them now,